We're away at AsiaBSDCon this week, but we still got a packed episode for you. First up, we got a sequel to the PC-BSD Tour segment we did a while back, so we're going to be highlighting how ZFS boot environments work. After that, Justin Gibbs is going to join us to talk about the FreeBSD Foundation's 15th anniversary. Wow, has it been that long? But yeah, you'll want to stick around for that. We're also going to return next week with a normal episode of BSD Now, which of course is always the place to be, SD. Episode 80, the PC-BSD Tour, Part 2, recorded March 11th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. And we're really not recording it then. This is a little bit done ahead of time because Alan and I are both in Tokyo and hopefully asleep at this point because it's very early in the morning over there right now. But we, of course, couldn't leave you hanging without an episode this week, so we have kind of a special we're doing. And no news and such, but we are going to have an interview, so you'll want to stick around for that, and a special segment that we're going to go to here in just a moment, where we're going to talk about PC-BSD and kind of demystifying the whole boot environment concept. What is it? What does it do? And just kind of a video walkthrough that I put together for us. So with that, do you want to mention anything else, Alan, before we go?
Boot environments are very interesting. I saw people talking about them yesterday, and I was like, oh yeah. I just
so this
kind of realized how much I've done with boot environments. Like my laptop has PC-BSD 9.2, 9.3, 10.1, and a version of PC-BSD with FreeBSD 11 kind of installed over top of it, all on the one laptop with boot environments. And, you know, at one point I was actually using running 10 with the Compat9X stuff, so I'd have one set of packages that worked across all of my different versions of FreeBSD instead of having to download the 2 gigabytes of stuff for each one. Especially when, you know, there weren't packages for head back when I started doing that. Or even the machine in the basement that our employee has been using. I needed a machine with stock vanilla FreeBSD on it for a little bit one day. And so I just created a new boot environment and like chrooted into it, ran BSD install, splatted down a clean FreeBSD, manually added it as a boot environment, or used the PC-BSD boot environment tool to make sure it'd be in the grub menu. And now when I needed it, I could just start a FreeBSD head image on my PC-BSD machine. There's no PC-BSD stuff at all happening in it. It's all just vanilla.
Stock,
And then it doesn't even mount the other data sets and do what I needed to do, experiment with, and then reboot, set it back to the regular PC-BSD, and the next day the employee didn't even know that I had basically reformatted the machine and then gone back.
Right. What's this new entry in my menu, right?
It's like,
boot environments is just, they're amazing things, and ZFS makes that all possible, and we've been doing them. We've been hitting the boot environments pretty hardcore now for like a year and kind of pushing forward with that. I'm doing some new interesting things with them. So I guess without further ado, we should let you guys watch the video and see how this all works. So I hope you enjoy. We'll be back in a moment. Hello, folks. Today we're going to be taking a look at boot environments. So kind of a mini walkthrough, not a full tutorial necessarily, but more kind of what's happening under the hood. This is probably one of the biggest features on PC-BSD people are interested in. There's a lot of misconceptions about what they are, what they do, you know, why did we switch to using them, and how does ZFS and Grub play into all this. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at it. So before we get started, boot environments aren't something brand new that we came up with. This has been done in Solaris before. That's where the original idea came from, and everything's pretty much made possible with ZFS. And think of boot environments as snapshots, essentially. Snapshots, data sets, and then ways to boot up off of those. So for those who aren't familiar with ZFS, it has a great feature where it can pretty much take instant snapshots of a data set regardless of the size, and it does that, you know, within half a second. It's really fast, right? And for desktop usage, this is great because we can now turn that into something called a boot environment. So if we take a look at our system here, boot environments are all interacted with through the command badmin. And if we take a look here, it has various sub options you can use. The basic one to start with is just bmin list, which is going to show us what boot environments we have on the system. If you take a look here, the most recent one, PC-BSD, when it creates updates, it tags a date on the end of everything, so you can tell when this boot environment was created. And under the active flag, it shows that N means it's active right now, and then R for reboot means that next reboot, this is still going to be the current boot environment. So this is our default at the moment. And of course, it's mounted on / and how much space this boot environment is currently using. As you can see on my laptop here, I have looks like 6 boot environments, all from various updates, and you can see the version of FreeBSD has been incremented there as well. So these are after various updates were done. But looking a little deeper, though, at the ZFS list command, boot environments, nothing special. You'll see here it's a ZFS data set, and these are data sets which are snapped and cloned so that they can exist separately. ZFS being a copy on write file system, creating the snapshot just basically says everything, all the data at this point in time, this is our snapshot, and then any new changes are written after that, so it's easy to roll back. But boot environments will create that snapshot, clone it, and then we can do interesting, neat things with it. So under the hood, it's just really doing ZFS commands to fool around and create a boot environment. So when we say boot environment, what we mean in PC-BSD, and this may vary depending on if you set this up, say, on FreeBSD yourself, when we create a boot environment, it's mounted to /, and it's going to contain your kernel, your world, and also all your packages. So in PC-BSD, if you'll look here, /user is not actually mounted at all. If we take a look at mount, you'll see /user is unmounted. So that means user local, everything will be contained under the boot environment. And some people don't like doing that. They like to have their packages separate from their boot environments. But for a desktop user and for me, the packages are just as important as the world and kernel. I mean, if I create a boot environment and do an update and reboot and X doesn't come up, that's just as bad as if something in the world went sideways for me and for most users as well. So we include package sets in the boot environments as well, which makes them a little bit larger, but not a big deal. You can always clean those up when you're done with them. So anyway, what will happen is when this boot environment is created, it's going to take a snapshot of /, and that includes /user, user local, basically everything that's not in a separate ZFS data set. So if you look here on my system, you'll see I have a separate /temp. I have separate data sets for my home directories, jails, port, source, var has its own data sets, and those will all not be snapped as part of the boot environment. So when I reboot, obviously my home directory contents are independent, which is exactly what I want, because if I need to roll back to a boot environment from, say, 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, the last thing I want to do is lose all my home data and lose all the changes that took place there. So those will exist independently. But managing boot environments is actually really simple, just using the badmin command again. So we'll just say we want to create a new boot environment here. So badmin, create, and we'll call it newbie because, why not? So creating a boot environment, really it just takes a snapshot, which is pretty quick. The bulk of the time there is we've tied the badmin command into the grub make config utility. So after you create a new boot environment, it's going to go ahead and update your grub config. So now you're wondering, well, why grub? What are they doing with that? Well, PC-BSD uses grub because it allows us to do boot environments properly. Unfortunately, the FreeBSD loader doesn't quite support all this, whereas grub lets us pick via menu-driven interface, which data set we want to boot up off of, which kernel, which world, and all that. And grub, what'll happen is when you create a new boot environment, let's just take a look here. More boot, grub. Every time you create a new boot environment, this grub.cfg file is going to get updated with your new boot environment information. And if you take a look in there, it's nothing really too special. If you've come from Linux or you've used grub in other environments, this is going to be very familiar to you. This is grub 2, and it's running a pre-release version of 2.02, which isn't out yet, but it has some of the features we needed. So in this case, we'll take a look down through here. Our first submenu entry is going to be our current boot environment. And you'll see here the submenu has a bunch of other menu entries in it as well. And we like to create a bunch of submenus for everything because sometimes you want to boot up a different option. So we have our normal boot up. That's with all your features on, all your settings. the way you would on a default boot. But I also add menu options for single user mode. And then we have menu options for booting in the kernel in verbose mode. And because this is the desktop, we'll have the display wizard. So if you want to boot up and change your video settings, maybe you've changed video cards, you need to run X and VESA mode for whatever reason to get to an X console, you can do that. And we also have an option in the Edge package set to boot to a console directly. So if you want to skip X and just go straight to the root login prompt, there you go. But anyway, and then you'll see there's some other magic here. I have this system as my laptop dual booted with Windows 7 UEFI, and that's so we can run Skype when we do the BSD Now show, so I can call Alan. But the grub config we have will auto-detect any UEFI and add options for booting other UEFI utilities. But after that, you'll see we have our 50 other BE. Starts right here, and these are all your old boot environments. So starting in PC-BSD 10.1.2 or 10.01.2, wow, that's a lot of numbers. It should be easier to say. But anyway, what we do is we group all the old boot environments together. So the new BE that I just created a moment ago just got shoved into that menu as the topmost item because that's the most recent boot environment, and they're sorted by age. Top being newest, going on down through history. If I decide to make the new BE my default boot environment, this is going to get thrown up at the top of the grub config, and that's going to be our default boot option, whereas my current one would then be shoved into the submenu of old boot environments. So we try and keep your menus real nice and clean. This is something we just added about 3-4 weeks ago just to improve the visual look of the boot menus when you start the system up. But how Grub handles this, and the reason we have to use Grub for this at the moment, is Grub allows us to do something neat. It supports ZFS, so it can load ZFS, load the pool, and even if it's mirrored or rated or whatever, it can handle all that. It even supports Jelly now too, which means we can do full disk encryption with Grub, where your entire system, the entire root ZFS pool is encrypted. There's no unencrypted /boot or any kernel directory or anything. So you can be sure that pretty much your entire operating system, minus the little Grub bootloader area, is encrypted and not able to be tampered with. But Grub's able to prompt for the Jelly password, load all the data from the Z pool, and then at this point, via its config, it's able to go through and say, let's load these modules, let's set all our different kernel options at boot. It can even pass the passphrase you used to Jelly along to the kernel, so the kernel won't prompt you again a second time during boot up. But anyway, this config file can get very long depending on how many boot environments you have, because we do create a lot of submenus for everything. But that's pretty much the gist of it. We don't recommend you make modifications to this file because it is going to get overwritten pretty much anytime you do anything with boot environments or anytime you've done an upgrade. So if you are somebody who wants a dual boot, say you added a disk or you added another system that you want to boot up that the PC-BSD didn't detect by default, that is doable. So let me show you here under user local etc grub.d. That's your directory you're going to want to start at. But you'll have an entry in here called 4D custom, and that's pretty much exactly what it says. That's where you're going to put custom entries. So you'll see here it's empty by default. But if you're ready to, you can just go ahead and throw your grub entries in there for booting up your other operating system. So you'll have to refer to the grub manual for that. Depending on what you're booting, the syntax is all going to be different. But they got pretty good docs, so it's usually pretty simple. And if you Google it, 99% of the time somebody else has already done this, and there's a gazillion forum posts out there somewhere on how to boot, Linux distro foo or whatever it is. But anyway, that's how Grub handles the boot environments and why we use Grub, because it lives separately out of the Z pool. So next up is updating. With the last update we did in PC-BSD 10.1.1, we changed our update manager to make exclusive use of boot environments. So this is going to require now that you are using Grub and using our Grub with boot environments to use our update manager. The reason we did this is updates are done a little bit differently now. So when I start the PC update manager command, and I don't have any updates at the moment to show you, I try to keep my laptop up to date. But when I run that with, we'll say package update, or I run it via the GUI or any other method, there's like 3 or 4 different ways to start updates on PC-BSD graphically and TrueOS as well. Or it happens automatically. We have a cron tab entry which can be set up to keep you up to date automatically. What'll happen is the update manager will start by kicking off a new boot environment. So it would have created, we'll say that badmin newbie. That's here. So badmin newbie is our new boot environment. Note, we're still booted in the old one. We just created it. It's only using 9 megabytes of space at the moment, so not much has changed. But the update manager will then take and mount that. So badmin mount. So you'll see it will mount that for us in a directory. Then the update manager is going to chroot into that directory, do all the package updates or kernel updates, world updates, whatever it is that needs to be done is all going to happen in that chrooted directory, not on your live system. So this is really cool. It means if the update's going to take a while, like no big deal. You can keep working. You don't have to worry about Firefox getting removed and updated while you're in use. So I can start an update in the morning and just let it do its thing and then just reboot at the end of the day. Because when it's all finished, it's going to unmount that newbie boot environment. And we'll just unmount it here. And then it's going to run badmin activate. And it's going to make that newbie boot environment the default. So next time I reboot, that's going to be the one we boot into now. Note that the flags have changed. We're still booted in our old environment, but newbie has now been flagged to reboot into. And if we look at the grub config, you'll see here, let's go up a little. Newbie is now the default entry. So that's what's going to get loaded next time. And the current boot environment I'm in has been pushed back into the previous boot environments menu. So that's really all the magic it's doing. It's nothing super special. We did that so that we can do package updates and do complete reinstalls of the package system without all the conflict detection stuff causing issues. What we found was the more complex your system is, the longer you let it go without updating, the more chance for package conflicts, and sometimes pretty nasty ones, which just doesn't work in an automated graphical environment where you say, just update me. I don't care about the conflicts, just get me up to date, right? So our new manager is able to do that and sort out those conflicts in the background. It's all doing it in another boot environment, piece of cake. But the cool thing is, after the update, say something goes sideways, something got messed up, the new kernel doesn't work on your system for some reason, very unlikely, but you want to know that there's a way to go back. Well, your previous boot environment was never touched. We didn't update anything in your old boot environment, which is great. That means I can pick that from the old menu and boot right into it the exact way it was when I shut the system down. And then, of course, at that point, you'd file a bug report, and I'd probably end up looking at it, and we'd figure out what happened and fix it for you so you can update again. And another thing is, during the updates, if anything goes sideways, that temporary boot environment can just be nuked and cleaned up, and no harm done to the system at that point. So it is a really cool system. It's still new. We've only been doing this for about 2 months. So we are looking for people to, of course, report bugs if you find any issues. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I've got about 8 or 9 systems here, all desktops for me and my kids and my wife. And I even turn automatic updating on them because I trust it that much. It just updates in the middle of the night. In the morning when they log in, it'll say, okay, your updates are done. You can reboot now. So it's definitely pretty slick. But that's kind of how boot environments work. There's no real mystery to them. And there's no black magic under the hood. It's just a couple scripts and using ZFS snapshots and the badmin utility and grub in some unique ways so that you can have instant rollback of your system at any point to wherever it was at. By default, we will keep 5 boot environments on your system. Some people say that's too much, so you can tweak that. We have settings in the GUIs where you can change that and say, okay, I want to only keep the past 3 or whatever. If you're tight on disk space, that's doable. The new update manager will also check for low disk space and try to remove an old one if there's not enough room in its estimation to do the update. So overall, yeah, it's pretty full featured. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how boot environments work and what we're doing with them. And of course, send your feedback or comments over to feedback@bsdnow.tv. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed that tutorial and explanation on how boot environments work and some of the neat things you can do with ZFS, Grub, FreeBSD, and all that kind of mixed together, and you get some awesomeness. But before we go to our interview this week, we do want to mention our first sponsor, which is going to be ixsystems.com/BSDNow. That's the URL. You want to type that into your browser and go there right now. Fill out the form, let them know that we sent you, and get their free guide to purchasing a server for open source. The things you need to know when you're selecting a vendor, ways you can talk to management and such. For
a great white paper, because as the technical person, we're sure you're already convinced that IX is the best solution. Now you just need to convince your boss.
Yeah, the management who maybe doesn't know the intricacies and why IX would be a better
Yes.
solution. So they have this handy guide which will explain that in a way that would make for good
Yeah.
presentation to management who will make that
But
ultimate
I think the
decision.
biggest things are that, you get a free pre-purchase consultation, which sounds like marketing mumbo jumbo, but what it means is you call them up, you tell them what problem you're having and why you need this hardware, and they can customize the hardware to do exactly what you want it to do. They can trim the fat on the features you don't need and, stack up on the features you do.
Or just stack up on
Exactly.
everything, as the ultra core system last week showed.
It's like if you need them to custom build a machine that fits more RAM than there's physically room to fit RAM in the machine normally, they can do that.
Yeah.
You need 120 cores and
and-
6 terabytes of RAM, they can do that.
Well, guess what? They can make that happen,
Or-
and they did that with the last one in a week, and they got it all
Yeah,
tested. and
that's the
everything
biggest
in a
thing
week, which
is
pretty
you get an
incredible.
accurate quote where, when you finally get the final bill, it's going to not be different. And they have reputable on-time delivery. They have a very intense QA process and burn-in where they will run the machine for a couple of days and make sure everything works, because most of these components are going to fail in the first 12 or 24 hours. So they make sure that happens while it's still in their factory before it gets to you. So when it gets to you, it's just going to work. But even with that, they can still guarantee that, when they tell you it'll be here in this date range, you'll actually get it then. And it's very fast turnaround. And that's even when you're doing something custom, like where they literally had to custom make the metal to fit it all into the chassis or whatever,
Sure.
they still get it to you in a reasonable amount of time. And
Yeah, they
you're
definitely
just
do.
not
going to
get that
there. So
somewhere
you
else.
need. Yeah, you just need to have your next experience be the IX
Yeah.
experience, so you know the difference and can, in the future, make your purchasing decisions go through there. But again, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Go there, let them know we sent you. We'd appreciate that. And we're joined now by Justin Gibbs, who's the founder and president of the FreeBSD Foundation. So thank you so much for coming on the show with us this week, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, we appreciate it. And congrats on the foundation's 15th anniversary, by the way. That's
It's
a
hard
great
to
milestone.
imagine that it's
Yeah.
been this long.
I know, right? It just time flies.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Definitely. So, we ask everyone the same question. So we're going to throw it at you. How did you first get involved with BSD in general? What led you to this place?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So I came to computing more as a power user. In high school and college, I was mostly helping people solve their software issues, reinstalling Windows and things like that. And so when OS/2 came on the scene in 1992, version 2.0 of OS/2, I'm like, wow, there must be something better than Windows, right? And OS/2, 32-bit, instead of cooperatively multitask, protected mode operating system, I thought it was the greatest thing. So I became involved in that community and was working on the Hobbs OS/2 mirror of software when I was approached by Walnut Creek CD-ROM to do a CD-ROM of that archive. So I actually did an internship, this must have been my sophomore year in college, at Walnut Creek CD-ROM to work on that CD. And who do I run into in the machine room, hunched over a terminal, hacking away on the first version of FreeBSD in 1993, but Rod Grimes. And so at the end of that summer internship, I took my meager earnings and threw it into a 486-66 with a Adaptec 1542. I mean, it was really a nice machine for the day. Right? All of 8 megs of RAM.
Just screaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rod convinced me to stick FreeBSD on it. He's like, oh, you should just dual boot this thing. And when I went back to college, having to work on the instructional machines and things like that always had 300 users on some tiny little deck, it was just way easier to do it all on FreeBSD. And I had networking that worked, and I could become I could take being a power user to a whole different level, having all the source code and all the capability of that system. And that's really how I got hooked on FreeBSD.
Cool.
Oh, that's really cool.
So could you tell us a little bit of the history behind the FreeBSD Foundation and when and how it actually got started?
Well, as you said, it's been 15 years. And the idea behind it really started in 1999. I had been involved with the project really since 1993 and had been on the core team and done lots of technical contributions for the project. And this is about the time that I bought a house and was thinking about getting married and having kids and understanding, the mortality of yourself and what your capabilities are. And I thought, what can I do to enhance my contribution to the community? Something that goes beyond just my personal contributions to the community.
Sure.
And in looking back at my experience with the core team and the need for things like protection of our intellectual property and some of the legal issues that had shown up early in the project, with the USL lawsuit, and also understanding that I'm a pretty good engineer, and we have lots of really good technical people in the project, but some of us, we're not so great at things like marketing, and all the other details that you don't think about when you're young and just hacking on the kernel for fun or whatever, that really go into making a project vibrant and allowing it to grow and being successful. So that's really why I look towards creating a foundation. Now, it could have been a for-profit company, but our community is open, and I really wanted to carry on that tradition in terms of the company that I created. And so that's why we are a 501c3 charity in the United States. It puts some restrictions on what we can do, but it also means that we're a transparent company. And
Sure.
That way everybody knows what we're doing, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. So jumping a little bit before this then, so what led you to become like a FreeBSD developer and then the president of the foundation?
Yeah. So I have this FreeBSD thing. It's great. I'm doing my college projects on it, stuff like that. But it had an ISA bus on it. And I had an ISA SCSI controller. And the geek in me just decided that was an intolerable situation.
Sure.
And at the time, the only other SCSI controller that FreeBSD supported that was ISA enabled was the 1742. And that particular piece of hardware was going end of life.
Oh, okay.
So there was a replacement product, the 2742. And I thought, being young and naive and a little bit stupid at times, how hard could that be, right? How hard could it be to write a device driver for this?
I got 20 minutes. This shouldn't take too long.
Absolutely. So I remember, actually, to this day, I had set up a card table at my parents' house. I was home for Christmas break. And they're like, what are you doing? And I had trucked my computer back home from school, set it up on this card table. And it was during that Christmas break that I finally got that device driver to work. And I was just a whole different world of possibilities that opened up at that point. Being able to take just a piece of useless hardware and get it to actually work, writing firmware for it, hooking it into the kernel, learning about these different protocols. And then the other aspect of it, I think, that really got me hooked was turning around and taking that software and getting it out to other people and finding out that it was useful to them.
Sure.
So that was, sometime in 1994, I started working on device drivers. And then from there, the SCSI subsystem. And pretty much I was all over the kernel. And that's how I became a developer. It was really Jordan Hubbard who also knew of me from Walnut Creek CD-ROM, because he'd come in there. And so my relationship with Rod that allowed me to come into the community. And it's just amazing how welcoming and understanding those individuals were when I came, because I was green. I was as green as you could imagine, right? I was motivated, I was excited, but I was green. And so to this day, I still think back and thank those guys for giving me the opportunity and creating a project that is welcoming to the people that are just starting out in this industry.
Yeah, and I think that kind of raises the point that we've kind of made before, that when people ask, why do people use the BSD license, is because the value you get out of writing the code is seeing other people use it and find it useful. And that's why we license things under the BSD license, because what we want back is just people to actually use it, right?
Well, and I think from my perspective, there's another motivation there. I don't believe it's my place to say what the value is of somebody else's effort and work.
Sure.
I have hacked on things for so many hours that my wife just cannot understand how I could still be in my recliner, working on that piece of code because I just want it to work, right? But my motivations for doing that could be totally different than for somebody else. And I really, I certainly don't create my software trying to put a burden on somebody else or try to enforce what my values are on them.
We just want people to use it and find, as long as it gets out there and it's of some use to somebody, like I'm happy with that.
Yep, absolutely.
So what led you beyond that then to become the president of the foundation? Was that just a result of starting it, or how'd that work?
Yeah. So when we started the foundation, getting through the 501c3 process can be somewhat tricky and expensive. And so when I started the foundation, I found out very quickly that the IRS requires you to have at least 3 officers.
Okay.
And so 3 is the magic number, right? So my promise at the beginning to Jonathan Bressler and John Polstra was that, look, guys, I will do all the paperwork as long as you guys will just be, one of the 2 other officers.
What were they? Were they like treasurer and something else?
So Jonathan Bressler was actually president.
Okay.
And John Polstra was vice president. And since I did all the paperwork, I was secretary treasurer.
Okay.
But really, at that time in the foundation's history, the titles didn't really mean anything other than they had to be in the Articles of Incorporation and things like that. And we all, apart from some of the early paperwork stuff, just shared the responsibility of trying to decide, gosh, how to become a nonprofit, how to, when we get to the point where we actually can take in donations, what do we do with them? How are we responsible with money? Things like that. As time went on, for the first perhaps half of the foundation's lifespan, that was the case for those titles.
Sure.
Today, more of our responsibilities, if you look at the board of directors or those of us who have titles, it's centered around committee work and things like that. So my daily responsibilities are mostly things helping with the executive director, Deb Goodkin, who's been with us for 9 years, helping her in her day-to-day operations, doing some of the technology review in terms of, how do we manage our contributor database and our website and all of those kinds of things. And then some of the other responsibilities that are shared across the entire board are just outreach and communication with the community and donors. And that's mostly what we do.
Cool. I guess one of the other things the foundation does is kind of be the interface between the project and companies that are consuming or contributing to FreeBSD. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure. So we've been very fortunate to be invited by a lot of large and small consumers of FreeBSD to really come in and talk to them about how they use FreeBSD, why they selected it, what issues they've run into, and what they'd like to see. And that really came out at first informally, talking to people at different conventions and trade shows and things like that, or developer summits, and then being asked in. But over time, it's actually grown where we're doing more outreach, trying to get more of those meetings because we found so much value on both sides. The thing that I found most surprising, I guess, about those conversations is how different, I guess, the decision-making process is at some companies and how they manage open source, or how they're mostly focused, it seems, on the technology, but not so much on the longevity of how they're going to manage that technology, or how they're going to make sure that it scales, or what's going to happen when they rev their product, or their product goes in a different direction than open source does. And that's mostly what our conversations are about. We talk about specific features and things like that we'd like to see in FreeBSD, but a lot of it is on just how do you manage pulling in different open source components into your application or appliance or solution, and being able to manage that over the long term. It's really a hard problem that most companies haven't completely solved.
Yeah, I've seen there's lots of projects, like you see a lot of these little embedded routers and stuff that aren't something like pfSense, where it's like, you know, the D-Link you buy is like, it uses a version of like the UPnP open source daemon from 10 years ago, and they've made some patches to it and they've never updated it since. And it's like, that's not a workflow that's really going to go into the future. You need to have a process. And,
yes.
you know,
and, you know, you look at some of the long-term consumers of FreeBSD, the network appliances, the Junipers, they went through that learning process, and it was very painful. And it's not just a FreeBSD issue, right? It's an open source issue, just as you said. You know, the UPnP daemon. You pick your component. There's hundreds of components, I'm sure, that go into most of these appliances that come from outside of the company. How do you manage that? It's really tough.
Yeah, and one of the things the FreeBSD Foundation does is kind of promote the idea that take all of the bits that aren't really specific to your product and push them back to FreeBSD so that they'll already be there when you go to Rev to the newer version and so on, and kind of get that two-way flow going.
Right. And I think that as we've tuned that message, we've learned that we have to put in place, as the FreeBSD project, facilities and technology to make that easier. Because it's one thing to say and explain to somebody and get them to realize that they need to provide or need to push this stuff back. They can accept that usually pretty easily. It's a pretty easy case to make. But then trying to figure out how do you do that? How do you reconcile your internal revision control system or process and train your developers and things like that to make that possible?
And then how do you actually get it
can
committed?
Be a daunting challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So maybe give us some of the highlights. What are some of the most memorable things you think the foundation has accomplished in the whole last 15 years?
Well, I can tell you, as the founder, when we got that first initial determination letter from the IRS, I was pretty excited. So not very many people, get to see that. But I guess from my perspective, you can go to our website. You can find all the technical things that we've done, and I'm certainly proud of a lot of the big things that we've done there. You know, the iSCSI stack and work on Capsicum, and even one of our first technical projects back in the S&P NG days was a big push to do fine-grained locking of the network stack. But I guess personally, I find our biggest accomplishments are things like, getting to our first employee, growing to the point where we're a multi-million-dollar company, and getting to the point where we can do advocacy that just wasn't possible before.
Yeah, stuff you can only dream about, you know?
Yeah. And it continues to grow today. I mean, some of my proudest moments just in the last year are things like being able to go to Grace Hopper and talk about diversity and bringing more women into engineering. Those are things that when I started the foundation 15 years ago, I just couldn't even conceive of, you know. And so I'm just extremely proud of what we built and that it continues to grow so much.
So what do you think are some of the important things that you and the foundation do that don't get enough attention? People don't realize you.
Well, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of behind-the-scenes things that happen that people don't get to see. But it's mostly around, you know, when you build a company, the things that have to happen inside a company and a project actually to make it work. So a lot of our behind-the-scenes things are, they sound kind of trivial, but they make a huge impact. So for instance, providing legal services to the core team, or setting up conference calls so that all the different groups within FreeBSD can communicate better. Getting folks to different conferences that are outside of our core area, right? So not just to the BSD conferences, but back to the Usenix conferences and the X conferences and things like that. So I think that's those kinds of outreach activities don't get talked about a lot, but have just as much of an impact on growing our community and making sure that FreeBSD is there 15 years from now or 20 years from now, as doing the technical things that get the most hay.
So can you think of any examples of maybe something behind the scenes, a memorable moment that maybe we're not so familiar with that was a big deal that happened?
Yeah. So some of the, I guess my biggest or fondest moments or memories working on the foundation have to do with those, personal or small group conversations about FreeBSD and why it exists and why we do what we do.
Hmm.
But I guess to tie something that's more recent that I think was just uh, at least really memorable for me was last year we were fortunate enough to receive $1 million gift from Jan Koum of WhatsApp.
Hmm.
And what most people don't realize is that there was an embargo on that information. And actually, Deb Goodkin, our executive director, was the only person in the foundation who knew.
Mm.
Hmm.
And she could not tell anyone. And so we're sitting together at a conference, and she's like ready to explode, and I don't know why. And a huge smile on her face, and she's like, "Well, something's good's going to happen, but I can't tell you what." You know. And in that moment, having worked with Deb for almost 9 years now, and having such just tremendous confidence in her capabilities and things like that, I wasn't worried. I
Hmm.
knew something great was going to happen, but I had no idea that it was going to be what it was when I finally did come to learn uh, that we were that fortunate. It's a huge statement
Hmm.
for that to happen. You know, and it just motivates me even more to ensure that the foundation remains open and um, well directed and does the
Mhm.
right things, because I feel a responsibility when trusted in
Right.
that way.
Especially with kind of the message that came with the money and the reason behind it, right? When he was telling the story about how
Yeah,
FreeBSD kind of helped him bootstrap himself and so on.
yeah, absolutely. And it's similar to the
Mhm.
story that I had. If I had not encountered FreeBSD, if I didn't trip over Rod's sleeping bag in the machine room when I was at Walnut Creek CD-ROM,
Hmm.
I don't know what would have happened
Mhm.
with my career. FreeBSD has given so much to me in terms of the engineer that I became that it's hard to repay that.
Sure.
So, what do you see for the future of FreeBSD and the BSDs in general going forward? What do you hope to see?
Well, I think that the system D discussion is interesting, and perhaps not interesting in the way that
Mhm.
most people think. The reason why Launch D, System D, SMF, you name the init replacement exists, is because somebody out there had a need, right?
Hmm.
So I think that FreeBSD and the BSDs in general, um, it's no longer enough to be a kernel and a POSIX user land to be an operating system. You need to be a platform. You need to be solving problems for people who need to build solutions in a way that allows them
Mhm.
to be efficient. And so I think that in the next 15 or 20 years, the capability of the system is going to grow
Hmm.
beyond what it is traditionally. Now you can talk about that perhaps System D wasn't um, developed enough out in the open or made some poor architectural choices or things like that. Um, I'm not going to weigh
Right.
in one way or the other on that.
Sure.
But I will say that as a community, we have to look beyond our borders
Hmm.
and really understand how people do computing today, how it's different from when Unix was conceived, and really push ourselves to innovate. The people who made this system, if you look back at CSRG and Bell Research before that, these folks were innovators. They were experimenters. Sometimes their initiatives failed, sometimes they succeeded, but they kept on trying new things. And I just want to encourage our community to do the same thing,
Hmm.
to not just be complacent and say, well, that's the way it's always
Hmm.
been done,
Sure.
when the world is changing. Technology is changing. People's needs are changing.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would be your favorite aspect of BSD? And it could be either technical or non-technical.
Oh, wow. My favorite aspect.
Make you pick one, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say
Mm-hmm.
the people.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, apart from the initial euphoria of getting into the kernel and being able to really do pretty amazing and sometimes abusive things to the system as a young kid, it was really the community that drew me to FreeBSD. And I think it's one of its big differentiators.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I read the mailing lists, I really wish that people would just take a step back and think about it in those terms, because we get so drawn into the technology and doing the right thing for the system, or acknowledging our heritage while bringing the system forward, that sometimes we forget about the human aspect of those interactions. And for me, they've been tremendously positive.
Mm-hmm.
And every time that I go to a conference or meet people with my foundation hat on, or even working for SpectraLogic, and talking about FreeBSD, it's really brought a lot of positive conversations and opened a lot of doors for me. And I just want to see that continue. I want to see that same kind of welcoming environment that I was fortunate enough to find be there for as long as the project exists.
Yeah. And I know the same thing for me is like I was just a user of FreeBSD for quite a few years, and then I went to my first conference, and that's where everything changed. And I felt like I was part of a community, and it actually is why I got involved in giving stuff back and getting more involved in doing more things, because I was like, this is an amazing group of people, and I wanna be part of it.
Yep.
So I guess. Normally, at the end, we just ask what else you might want to mention, but I want to ask you about your elevator pitch for FreeBSD before we let you go.
My elevator pitch for FreeBSD. Yes. So I get asked this question a lot, right? But in a different way than I wish people would ask the question. So the question is, well, what should I pick, Linux or FreeBSD or some other system? The honest answer, and I think the one that's most successful in persuading people to try FreeBSD, is that whatever you pick, it's going to have its issues. Whatever solution you're going to build, the reason you're building that solution is because it hasn't been built before.
Mm-hmm.
So none of those components is going to be ideally suited in every single way to what you're trying to do. So the question you then have to ask yourself is, once I get my solution working, I'm already motivated to do it. I have the resources. I know my product launch date. What are you going to do then? What type of community are you willing to have a long-term relationship with as you work on whatever it is that you work on? And for me, the BSDs make that way easier. For a good 4.5 years or so, I was working at Adaptec on Linux device drivers and FreeBSD device drivers and things like that. So I've had my toe in both camps. And I really think that apart from the licensing and the people and everything, is the real differentiator. We are a system that really allows technical merit to win. Not always, but that really is the spirit behind the community.
Sure.
And when you have to bear the burden of diverging from an open source community, you may not understand what that means when you first start. But going forward, it can be just such a heavy weight to bear that it can just stifle innovation. And so for me, like my elevator pitch is, you're going to build this thing. You're going to diverge. How are you going to manage that? Here's a community that actually is interested in you being successful, even if it means that some of your stuff doesn't come back.
Sure.
And and has ways for helping you get your stuff back into the community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to mention aside from that?
Yeah.
Well, I think the last thing that I'd like to mention, and this is a difficult thing for anybody to do, because, well, at least for me. I mean, there's some people, I guess, who are born to do this, but asking for money is really, really hard. Okay. And the foundation has struck this perhaps too conservative balance in terms of not being in front of people and asking for money and things like that. So I guess the last thing that I'd say is that everybody's contributions matter. Not just monetarily, but also just being involved in the project and things like that. And so I would encourage folks to make the effort, right? To be more engaged in the community, do what you can for the community, because it will give back tenfold to you in return. And also just to communicate with us. Tell us about what you're doing and how we can help you. And not to be fearful of, well, gosh, you know, I want to go to this conference or something like that, but it's not exactly BSD related and things like that. We need to, as a community, reach beyond our borders, and the foundation is here to help you do that. So if you have an idea or want to go promote FreeBSD in some place where it traditionally has not been, we're here to support you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Justin. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with us.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Okay, and we'll be back the rest of the show in just a moment. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Justin there. We have a little bit more on this special episode of BSD Now. But before we get to the next discussion, we do want to mention one of the other sponsors this week, which, of course, is DigitalOcean. And the website for that, digitalocean.com. You can't miss it. But go there, sign up. We got this awesome coupon you can use called FreeBSD Now. So just go type that into the coupon code box, and that'll give you a $10 credit. So you can spin up a VM or two and try some stuff out and see how that works for you. And, of course, it'll be running FreeBSD. What is it? FreeBSD 10.1? Or did they give?
Yep.
10.1?
And
Okay.
Also, the coupon code works retroactively if you've not used another coupon code. So if you created your account when you heard the news that FreeBSD was available on DigitalOcean, if you go into your account, you can apply the coupon code and still get the $10 today.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so that's a great deal, guys. There's no reason not to, and they make it so easy to spin up a VM, and there you go. You got a FreeBSD session running anywhere in the world. I mean, they got locations all over the place. Yeah, and you can definitely pick which one will work best for what you're doing. Maybe you want something across the world or something just up the street, so you have good connectivity. But they'll make it easy to do that, so go set that up today.
Yeah, they have lots of different data centers. All the machines are powered by SSDs and high-end Intel servers, so you're going to get lots of CPU time, and your I/O is going to be great because it's all backed by SSDs. They have, as you can see, this kind of rolling demo here. They have an easy-to-use control panel. It makes it very easy to do stuff. You don't have to be an expert at anything. But there's also an API, so if you don't need the Fisher-Price control panel and you want to script it so that you can spin up 10 VMs whenever you need, or if you need to be able to elastically scale up and down, you can do that with the API very easily.
Nice. Okay. Well, let us know how that works for you guys too. We love.
They also have a bunch of tutorials
listeners
on how to use FreeBSD, and like, you know, if you're new to FreeBSD, they're great because it's like, all right, I've just installed FreeBSD. Now what do I do? And it kind of walks you through how to do the updates, how to get newer packages, how to play with different things, how to set up a web server.
So here you go. Maybe you're a Linux admin who doesn't have the ISOs on his local box or whatever and can't throw it in a VM. Well, do this. Shoot, get a FreeBSD spun up and you can start playing with it right now and see what all the fuss is about. So, okay, well, we have a special discussion segment this week, which I guess we're doing a little bit of history about how PC-BSD got started. So, yeah, I'll discuss some of that.
I'll kind of do a little bit like an interview, I suppose, but
I guess like a mini
could you tell us a little bit about how the project was originally formed? What caused you to do this?
What led up to this? Well, I guess this will be our 10-year anniversary, 2015. So we were officially started in sometime early 2005, although I started hacking on it maybe 3 months before. There wasn't a long period of time between when I started hacking on it and did our first, beta release or whatever. But where it came from was, I guess 2001, 2002. I had been running a variety of Linux distros and desktops. So I got married in 2001. Very poor, didn't have money, couldn't buy a Windows license, didn't want to buy Windows, was tired of Windows at that point. Of course, couldn't afford a Mac and wasn't a big fan of Macs at that point either. So I ran a lot of different Linuxes. I worked in a computer science department for a while at a college and got a bunch of hardware that they were throwing out. So, of course, a bunch of old stuff, and turned that into a couple desktops for me and my wife, and tried a variety of Linuxes on it. Gosh, this was like back in the Lindos days. Does anyone remember that before they changed to Linspire, and then who knows?
Yeah, I remember the lawsuit.
Before they faded off. Right. And then we ran SUSE, we ran Mandrake, Red Hat. There had to have been like 5 or 6 different distros we tried. It was a number of them. My wife hated it because I kept switching it on her. Like every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I'd be like, I don't like this one. This sucks. So I'd change it to something else, right? And she kept, stop messing with my computer. If you're going to do that to your own computer, which I understood. That gets annoying. But, I was trying to find something that worked. It was the point. Like just something that worked for what I wanted a desktop to be. And at this point, I had had some experience with FreeBSD. So I had run MonoWall way back in the day. Frisbee had played with that. And then, of course, I'd run Frisbee and then had some FreeBSD boxes set up when I had done some web serving things at a couple jobs I was at. So that was kind of the experience, leading up to this point, right before PC-BSD happened. So do you want to keep asking me questions, Alan, or you want me just to keep rambling?
So I guess, was there something specific that made you choose FreeBSD as the base instead of a Linux?
Probably I guess just the organization of the system. So I had run enough FreeBSD to know my way around the base system, and I just did not like how Linux was laid out. Package management in particular was a killer thing for me. We had many instances of upgrades gone wrong on Linux, which was not very nice, and I ended up wasting a lot of weekends fixing things that should have just worked. But I remember going, FreeBSD, when you got it set up, it was just so stinking stable. It just worked, and it was real simple. I loved the port system. Being able to select my own options for packages and ports was a big deal. So that's kind of what drew me back. Like I had already known I had liked the system and was somewhat familiar with it, but that was kind of the clincher. And then I was like, well, how hard would it be to make a desktop of this? And at the time there wasn't really any desktop distribution, for lack of a better word, out there. So I just threw a FreeBSD box together. What I actually did was I had a Windows PC because I played a lot of games. So of course you had to have a Windows PC somewhere. So I grabbed VMware at the time and threw FreeBSD in it and said, what would it take to turn this into some kind of viable desktop with some kind of packaging system? And that was in the early days when I had started the PBI system. I wanted things to be self-contained and not break my system every time Firefox got updated and whatnot.
Changing versions of OpenSSL or something wasn't going to break everything that depended on it.
Everything just broke. And that's what I had experienced on Linux a bunch of times, even though supposedly a lot of that stuff was trying to be solved at that point. But it just broke enough that I was tired of it and wanted something new. So first thing I wrote, I think, was the installer. I was like, if we're going to do a desktop, installing in a text prompt really sucks. I'd like something graphical that's easy where it's just click, 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 and done. And I knew a bit of Qt at this point. So I wrote an installer for that. And believe it or not, I took Frisbee to do it. So Frisbee at that point was kind of the live CD of choice. And they had their scripts online. I think I just found them on their website at some point and said, oh, they have these scripts which will build a live image. I bet I could build an installer on that live image, which then just splats bits on a disk. And that was how PC-BSD was born. And of course, the name PC-BSD, well, it's a personal computer now, so it's BSD based, so not very imaginative, I admit. But you need a name because you got to get a domain and you got to put it up somewhere.
You need something short and easy to remember, and that seems to be perfectly good, eh?
And it was. I didn't have any connection to the community. I didn't know anybody at the time. This was just purely I'm going to do this and see if I can make something go. So anyway, that's what I did. We released a beta. It got some attention, and we just kept releasing stuff, and one thing led to another, and here we are almost 10 years later.
Yeah. So I guess tell us how IX Systems got involved in that.
Well, at the time I was living in Washington State, so I was in Vancouver, Washington. And everyone, when you say that, if you're not from the area, they think, "Oh, Canada." No, 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 Vancouver, Washington. It's basically a bedroom community for Portland, Oregon, okay, right across the Columbia River there. So I was living in Vancouver, Washington at the time, and I don't even know how I found them, but there was the conference that happens in Portland there, OSCon. So I think I heard somewhere through the grapevine or on their website that there was a FreeBSD booth. And, of course, the IX Systems guys were doing that. So Matt Olander was there, and I think Denise Ebry was there. And I emailed him a couple weeks beforehand. I don't even remember how early it was, but I just asked, hey, I'm local. Could I come to this conference and put CDs out on the table for people to take and kind of promote the project? And, oh, yeah, sure, come on down. So I showed up. I had a bunch of CDs I put down. I had a nice shirt made that had the PC-BSD logo on it, and I stood there and just answered questions. And people kept coming wanting to talk about it. Like, oh, you can actually run a desktop on FreeBSD. Like, people didn't even know Xorg worked at that point, right? That was all new information in 2005. So anyway, just kept doing it and, kept talking to the IX guys over time. And one thing led to another, and they decided to basically buy out the name essentially and sponsor me to come work on this. So PC-BSD wouldn't go away because this was all being done as a weekend project up to this point. I had a full-time job elsewhere, and this was a labor of love, as they say, because I really wanted to see a BSD desktop succeed. I just felt like, Linux is neat. It was gaining popularity at that point, but I wanted something BSD based. There was too much cool stuff happening in the base system. This is even before ZFS, I think. But everything was UFS based at that point. But still, FreeBSD was just fun. I liked it, and I just felt like it would be a shame to have this kind of fade off into server room obscurity, because Linux was getting all the press and whatnot. We need it to be everywhere, desktop, servers, you name it. I'd like to see FreeBSD running on it. So that's what kept me motivated and kept me going. And the IX System sponsorship really helped a lot as well, of course, because now I actually had time and some resources to devote to making this happen.
And I guess that kind of leads us into who else is involved in PC-BSD now. It's not just you anymore.
Well, no. So we've got several folks now, and so my brother Ken is actually one who works with us. He's employed by IX Systems as well, and he's the one who does the Lumina desktop, which is a desktop developed specifically on PC-BSD. Of course, the guys at IX are still helping out a lot with that. So Matt Olander over there is a big advocate of it. Josh Petzel's been doing server stuff forever, I think, for PC-BSD and done a great job at that. And people come and go in between. We've had a lot of people, college students and whatnot will come by and work on something for 6 months, develop a new utility. Especially in the early days, it's like we had to start from scratch. There were no GUI utilities. Right. For most things on BSD. Like Linux had their set, which is great, but it all assumed you were running a Linux kernel with Linux utilities, and they didn't grok, PF or didn't grok Gpart or, didn't do FreeBSD's fdisk or you name it. There was nothing there. How did you set up Wi-Fi back in the day on FreeBSD? Well, you added wpa-supplicant.conf by hand and some very cryptic stuff in the man page, and then hoped and prayed it connected. Right? So we had to start from scratch kind of and build utilities to do all that stuff. So we had a lot of people in the early days show up. They'd build a utility, it'd get added to our tree, and next thing you know, we have a user manager now. We have a wireless manager. We have a disk manager. We have a firewall manager, and it just kind of slowly built up. Now we have a control panel full of all the stuff you would expect to have on a desktop environment for something that somebody a normal user could use. And that's one thing I forgot to mention too. My biggest beef was I wanted a desktop that a normal user could use, a Windows user, maybe somebody who's not technically inclined. Yeah, it was a gateway drug, so to speak. Well,
and I think
to get them on open source.
When I first heard about it, I really liked the idea of Windows XP. A lot of companies are using it because that's just what they don't, they're not. It's not because they don't have any apps that are specific. Almost everything's done in the browser now. Why aren't all these machines just PC-BSD? Right?
Correct.
And
that's kind of the market we were shooting for. Was like it just needs to be easy to use. I boot, I install, and it works. Oh, I got a web browser, I got an email client, and how I can get about doing my work. So as long as they weren't relying on some critical app, which was Windows only, then there was very little reason not to switch, especially because the price is right? But that's definitely some of the things we're still targeting and trying to make that better and better to the best we can with the system.
Well, I remember the original version of PBIs had that that feel like the old Windows 95 type MSI, or not MSI, like so Windows 2000, but the idea of when you want to install a program, you went to a download website, you downloaded a thing, you double clicked it, and you went next, finished, and that was, you had an app. That was the workflow.
Yep.
Of course, now it's changed to the idea of this app store, which you've adapted to, and that's working well. But that was the initial thing that drew me to PC-BSD.
Definitely, yeah. The PBIs were definitely the big draw at first, but you got to recognize things change. It's been 10 years. Like technology changes. 10 years ago, I mean, smartphones were in its infancy. Nobody really knew how this stuff was going to shake out. But yeah, like the package system, yeah, PBI was my baby back in the day. But technology's moved on. I was happy to move along with it. So yeah, we have more of the app store. We call it the App Cafe. And that's more of the model now where everything just connects to the net and does its thing. You're not having to sneak your net files on a USB stick or something anymore. Like those days are over.
Browse through a website and try to find the specific PBI you were looking for, which was,
you don't need to do that anymore. Like, yeah, those days are beyond us or behind us now. So, yeah, we're glad to adapt to the future, and we're excited with what the future is happening in FreeBSD at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I got to say, 10 years into it, I feel like there's more excitement right now for what's going on in FreeBSD than I've seen in the entire 10 years I've been doing this. I know just based on the traffic we see on the website and comments and people running it and sending bug reports in and trying it out, like it seems like there's been a shift that's happened here. More and more people are giving BSD another look for the desktop specifically. But that's exciting for us. And what's kind of cool is I feel like for a long time, obviously it was a small project. There's only been a few of us actually paid to work on it and a few volunteers. So a lot of it was just playing catch up, writing the apps to do Wi-Fi management, writing the apps so that we could do X, Y, Z graphically and not have to dump somebody to a shell prompt, right? But we kind of hit a point, we'll say 2 years ago, year and a half ago, maybe in the 9 series, where we started having all those apps now. Like we've solved those things. We have the app that can do this now. We have the app that can do that now. And it's really easy to run a desktop. But now it's like, now we're getting to innovate and say, okay, now that we've solved those things that were messing from desktop experience before, what can we do different now? How can we experiment and push desktop
leverage
computing
ZFS to be able to do the replicated backups and the time machine style stepping through the snapshots and
now that we've kind of caught up to 2015, like now how can we go to 2020 and like really drive it forward? So you mentioned here, I guess that's kind of the next question. So what are we looking at for the future? Well, we've done a lot of pushing with ZFS, with boot environments and snapshots. We switched to using the grub bootloader so we could do loading of the kernel directly from ZFS and not needing to chain load and all this other stuff, which makes boot environments possible, right? You can type a command. Within a second, you have a snapshot of your system as it was exactly at that moment in time, and that now shows up in your boot menu. So you can boot back into that snapshot. Basically, it's system restore done right, in my opinion. Like that's the way it should be done. So not just mangling and going back and trying to restore these files. And hopefully, we'll get it right.
Windows always had that option, last known good configuration. That never seemed to actually be the right one.
Never worked.
But, if you have these snapshots, like, I know it worked this day. And there, give me back. And the best part is when you're booting off that, it doesn't undo what was in the newer one. And you can even, get down to manually doing, ZFS diff to see what files changed between this one where it worked and this one where it didn't to figure out what was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's done properly. It's done right. ZFS makes this all possible. There's just all these cool technologies kind of congealing into FreeBSD at this moment in time, it feels like, that are allowing us to push the envelope forward and do new things. So we mentioned in last week's episode some of the new features for our next quarterly update, and we're doing a really big push in the security and privacy section. So what can we do to make the system more secure? Protect your privacy better, anonymity, etc. So things like adding Tor mode, encrypted home directories on an external media. Like that's really cool. And still you get ZFS and you get snapshots in your home directory. And we can do all these cool things now that before we couldn't even dream of because we were still worrying about writing a user utility, and just some of the basics. But it's neat to be able to push ahead that way. And doing backups and getting your data back is just as important to me as running the system, because that's so the utility I wrote, Life Preserver. That's a good example. Okay, I named it that because really, this is your life you're talking about. The only thing you never get more of in life is time. And that means all the time I've spent at my desktop here working, things I've typed, pictures my wife has taken, those all cost time. And that's, you have a finite amount of that, right? So I want to preserve all that time I spent, those bits of my life on my desktop, because let's face it, my desktop's got everything on it. I can't lose all these files and all this data. So Life Preserver came out of that as like, okay, since I've done everything, I've got it tweaked just the way I want it. I never want to have to go tweak another thing again to get it just perfect. How do I preserve that? So backing up to a FreeNAS box or replicating with ZFS was this the logical solution. I can do a bit-for-bit replication, and then I can do a bare metal restore of it with the PC-BSD install media. That has saved my bacon so many times because let's just face it, I'm a developer. And I like to tweak things and I like to break things, and I do break things fairly often because, oh, let's try this. Let's see if that works. So being able to just say, oh, no big deal. I have a CD here. Let me just restore it from the backup on the FreeNAS box. Done. Like, I don't even have to reconfigure everything. It just, I click, I wait a few minutes, let it do its thing, and come back, reboot, and I'm right back to where I was when the backup took place. So think of it as a way of taking boot environments a step further. We've even replicated those boot environments off-site, so you can pull that onto a system or another system. There's been several times where I've cloned my desktop to my laptop because I'm like, oh, I'm getting ready to go to Tokyo next week.
I need my entire work environment to come with me.
I need everything, right? I don't want to have to pick and choose. Well, I need that. I don't need that.
Oh, I forgot that.
No, I forgot that. Or worse, you get there and you realize you didn't leave your desktop running or something. So, oh, I didn't have those files in the cloud. I need this script I was working on a couple weeks ago. Well, great. All I do is just replicate it to my laptop. And that's kind of what we're doing with the Persona crypt, with having everything on a memory stick. So eventually you can just say, oh, well, my desktop's my memory stick now. And I can just plug into the various portals I use to bring up my desktop are really irrelevant. I can change desktops. I can go from the upstairs computer to the downstairs or to my laptop, and everything's on my encrypted media stick. So anyway, those are the ideas and things we're trying to think of for the future.
I think those are important.
Pushing desktop computing.
Because, I've talked to many FreeBSD developers and other BSD developers, and a lot of them have this story about this cool tool, utility, or patch they were working on, but then their hard drive crashed, or they lost it in some way, or it got munged or something. It's like, if only you had had a backup.
Right. That's exactly right. And so, preserving your data, preserving the life and the time you spend on that is just so critical. But anyway, it's not just all security and privacy. There's other things cooking out there. The Lumina desktop is a desktop designed on the FreeBSD or PC-BSD system. So it has understandings of things like ZFS, modern file systems, snapshots, rollback, and all that jazz. And we are going to keep trying to push the envelope the best we can. And you know what? It doesn't have to be my idea. And one of the things I love about the FreeBSD community is I get inspired by so many things. It could be a comment on IRC, which I'm looking at right now. It could be an email that comes in. A lot of times I go to conferences and come back with 3 times the work I had before.
But the other thing is that the conference gets you re-excited about it, right? It recharges your batteries.
Somebody's like, ooh, we just added this thing to FreeBSD. And I'm like, oh, we could do something really cool with that. Like, it just gets you inspired. So conferences are awesome. And if you do any kind of development or just want to get inspired even as a user, like, you need to come to them in the future. It's hard to describe the experience, but everybody takes away something really cool.
The crazy thing is this has happened to me twice today already. Just discussions happening on IRC on the mailing list. It was like, and it's like, oh, Michael Dexter is working on this thing to kind of help you understand where your disks are and how they're connected and so on. And he's parsing the output of cam control. But it's really human readable. And it's really hard to get the right information out of it, especially when you use verbose mode, because it spits out a bunch of weird lines that don't make any sense. And then, there was discussion about the PCI conf -L, and somebody's writing a patch for it for libxo, which makes it output like XML or JSON or some structured stuff. And it's like, well, really, that should be done slightly differently so that you get more information that we don't normally include in the human readable output. And it's like, oh, what if we put libxo into cam control? And then I'd be able to parse out the bits of that information that I want much more easily than trying to, grep awk and sed out the output that was designed for a human to read, when I could actually get the output as it was designed for a script to read. And then it's like, what if libxo could do name value pairs, where you could actually just pipe it into SH and it would create the environment variables for you, and you wouldn't actually have to use something like JQ to parse the JSON output. And it's just like,
well, you get excited. Next thing you know, a week later, you got like a new program or some new code that you're ready to drop and like change the world.
It's like, oh my.
It's exciting, but no, I'm excited. It's exciting times. I know, the Achilles heel of PC-BSD has always been hardware support. And I'm excited to see what's happening in FreeBSD 11 with bringing the DRM code up to date and starting to add like Haswell, Broadwell, and all the latest Xorg bits and KMS bits from Linux have been ported over.
And doing it in a way this time that it'll be easier to update in the future, because we'll be able to keep going that way.
Yes, the time distance between when it hits Linux and then shows up in BSD should be much smaller in the future. So I'm very much looking forward to 11, and I'm kind of using this time, knowing that that's coming, to get all these other cool new features in and start really adding these cool new things, so that when all the hardware support just magically shows up,
it's like, oh look, compared to your Linux, we have all these features that you know. When you look at comparing all the different Linuxes, there are very little differences between them. It's like, we put it together slightly differently or whatever. But there's not really a feature. Most Linuxes don't have a feature that other ones don't have. Whereas PC-BSD is going to have these tools that you just can't get anywhere else.
You'll be like, this is unique. This is something different. And this is a different take on the desktop is what we hope. And the best part is, and it's in an open source manner, you're not having to go pay Apple or Microsoft to get whatever their latest desktop is that you can't really trust, because you don't know what the heck's going on under the hood. But I love the freedom that it brings, and I love being able to open up a shell prompt and start sifting through code, any of it. I can pull down the kernel, at times, and need to take a look at what's going on in there. But it's just an exciting time to be doing desktop stuff, and workstations are going to be around. I know mobile and all that's happening too, and we'll be doing hopefully more mobile with BSD in the future as well. But definitely exciting times.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's about all I have as far as history goes. And
lots of information. I think that give some people just more of an appreciation for what PC-BSD really is about, and may hopefully get some more people interested in helping you get there with some of that stuff. And
yes, and try it out. If it doesn't work, fine. Send in a bug report. We'll give you money back guarantee, right? But no. We love getting comments and feedback from folks out in the audience, so that we can work and improve it and make it better for next time. Okay, well, we do need to mention one of our other sponsors for this episode, which of course is going to be Tarsnap. And I don't know if you can bring the URL up for that.
Ready. There we go,
Alan. Okay. But tarsnap.com/BSD Now is going to be where you need to go to start getting set up with doing your backups off-site, as I just mentioned in the previous segment. You don't want to lose your data. That data costs you time, and time you don't get back. That's the only thing you can't replace.
How much time does it take you to type a gigabyte of code? A lot. How much does it cost you to save it? 25 cents.
Right? So you just need to be doing your backups offsite, and you need to be doing them encrypted, so you don't have to worry about whatever you have up there being stolen or lost or leaked or being turned over to some agency.
If you're going to have your desktop on an encrypted USB key, you need the key for that backed up somewhere, so that you can decrypt that USB key if their hard drive crashes or whatever.
Yeah, multiple redundancies. Airplanes have redundancies for everything, right? Because it's critical, and your data is critical too. So you need to have all your stuff stored offsite.
That was one of the first things they taught me in college. If there are not 3 copies of your file, it doesn't really exist. You just think it does.
Right. So definitely get set up with that, folks. Tarsnap makes it easy. Clients for pretty much everything. Put a couple bucks in and start playing around with it right now. Yep. So, of course, we need to wrap up this special episode we've done this week, but we do want to mention we'll be back next week from AsiaBSDCon with, I'm sure, lots of stories and some new interviews and tales to tell and all the details about the conference. So, hopefully we'll be, let's see, I get in Monday night. So I have a couple days of sleep before I have to do the show. So hopefully over the jet lag.
I get back on Monday as well. And then on Tuesday, I'm hosting a webinar with IX Systems, actually, about ZFS. And then Wednesday, we'll have the show. It'll be a crazy week.
Great. But anyway, send in your show ideas, comments, or anything we missed while we were away. Please send it in to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we will look forward to reading that as soon as we get back.
Yeah, it'll be important for you to send in stuff because, for that week, we'll be kind of busy. We won't see everything happening the same.
All right, so we will see you guys next time.